As you get older, the years seem to pass quicker and quicker. I'm not sure exactly where I read this, but this phenomenon was explained by somebody somewhere that it's a combination of brand new experiences and rutless lifestyle of your average kid that makes it seem like your childhood moved a lot slower. Then when one transitions into adulthood, one finds that the days and weeks end up bleeding into each other, and a month could pass without you even noticing. I engaged in a little bit of nostalgia during the holiday season by taking a couple trips down to the old football field I used to play in when I was younger. Since then, the field has become swamp-like and overgrown. We played throughout the winter, and I remember dressing up in my mini football gear, hopping in the back seat of an old rickety Volvo, and immediately freezing my balls off. Why, you might be asking? Well, my father was convinced that if he blasted the air conditioning and kept the windows down on the ride over to the field, I'd be less uncomfortable when I began practice. At the time, I desperately wanted the heat turned on, or at least for the windows to be rolled up, but now that I think about it, the temperature during practice wasn't so bad when the car ride over felt like hell had already frozen over. It was the first holiday season where I could afford decent presents for everyone too, so that was a nice change. But unfortunately, dividing up my time between buying gifts, keeping everyone happy by dropping by at least once, and swapping between head colds and food poisoning, it left no real time for video editing, writing scripts, or much interaction on social media. But I assumed that when I came back, the same types of social justice nutcases would be engaged in the same bullshit strategy they have always been engaged in. Bigotry packaged as high-mindedness, bullying rebranded as righteous fury, and self-obsessed, ego-driven hipster douchebags acting like they are the heroic vanguard for all that is courteous, intelligent, and allowed in the world at large. And I was right. When you start to see the pattern emerge in thought processes and action plans, all of these situations just seem to meld into one amorphous pustule that smells like whatever neat, awkward, and totally quirky food item they all pretend to like the taste of for a couple of months. There is no intellectual position too asinine, no point too stupid, and no assertion so idiotic that they won't cling to it in order to uphold their self-granted reputation as someone who's both intellectually and morally better than the average person. I mean, they read a few essays by Judith Butler on their Kindle, so they kind of know a lot of stuff, you know? Anyone with half of a brain could predict that the same loop-de-loop mental gymnastics would be present within these annoying cry bullies when trying to justify doing the things they do, and how things will always conveniently spin in their favor if they say enough big words in a row, regardless of what they mean. It is still true that, luckily for them, every single rule you have to be bound by in order to be seen as morally acceptable in their framed but lensless eyes can be waved away for someone they happen to like, or if it just doesn't fit with the narrative they're looking to craft, either about themselves or how dangerous, normal, everyday, benign behavior that they totally don't do ever is. Either that, or they proclaim the most obvious positions from the rooftops as if it gives them an edge on the rest of the world. I mean, honestly, how long did it take you to figure out that you were anti-rape? It probably took a lot of mulling over and examining both sides of this very controversial issue. Good for you, here's your trophy. There will always be a constant stream of manufactured or exaggerated problems, and solutions will be figured out for these made-up problems, just so they have something else to bitch about. The solutions to those imaginary problems usually consist of screaming at the top of their lungs about how morally superior they are to the dirt-covered masses, and then fucking back off to their parents' second penthouse apartment in LA for spring break, or they will proceed to drink until their stomach delivers them an urgent eviction notice. Then while they're getting their stomach pumped, they will whine about how the doctor raped them because he didn't get her enthusiastic consent to shove something down her throat. It's only a matter of time before abortion is seen as a revolutionary act. Therefore, getting pregnant and getting a fresh vagina scrape suck really sticks it to that patriarchy. I can't wait for the morally necessary debate over what the ingredients in an LGBT sandwich would be. And don't just pick the obvious ones. Be creative. So, I present to you, my dear viewers, 2016, Year of the Hipster Douche.
Silence takes the side of the oppressor!
Why are you picking on hipsters? Well, for a very specific reason. Drawing off of my own definition, a hipster is someone who follows the latest fashion, hobby, and eating trends, especially if they aren't considered mainstream. Like the people who wore Live Strong bracelets because they had to make sure the world knew that they donated to a cancer support group. Or they didn't much care about the cancer portion of it, they just liked the hip new bracelet everyone was wearing. That is its own class of person who, despite all of their faults, isn't really a bad person. In fact, lots of them are great people. They just tend to express their individuality in the same way everyone else does. But in then come the hipster douches who don't just follow trends, but destroy them along the way. You see, these hipster douche nobodies constantly invade various communities because it's the hot new thing in town. Not because they're terribly interested in what's going on, but because they want to ride the train of popular quirk so they have a piss-poor excuse to call themselves eclectic. At bottom, they aren't very interested in the stuff to begin with, whether it be skepticism, video games, comic books, certain music genres, exotic food, literature, atheism, or anything else. Yet every time they enter a community, they recognize that they can't really claim to be a member of that cool, geeky, quirky, and hipster-approved community without actually familiarizing themselves with the material. So they begin to whine and complain about how people are a bit standoffish with them because they consistently claim to be part of some community while displaying all of the ignorance of someone who's never heard of this shit before. For this point, I'm going to be operating under the axiom that the amount of hipster douche someone is directly correlated to the likelihood that they're a third-wave feminist. They fall back to what they know. Accusations of misogyny, sexism, possibly racism, and how not being immediately lauded as the best hipster douche to ever hipster douche within that community means there's clearly something wrong with everyone else. All of this relates very well to the cleverly titled trans trender phenomenon, and it gives a good example of what I'm talking about. You see, it is true that some of these hipster douches see being transgendered as something you just decide as a teenager when your parents think you should have a 10 o'clock curfew. People who are actually transgendered are going through something rather difficult, while totally quirky and totally outside the norm hipster douches just slap on some lipstick or baggy clothes, contour their already present man boobs, and play oppression dress up. Those who are transgendered are generally pretty secretive about it, at least in my experience. Not that they should necessarily have to be, but they honestly don't want anyone treating them differently just because they have a hardware and software mismatch. They just want to live their lives as easily as they possibly can. While these annoying asshats want to be treated like Jesus Christ ascending into heaven after the resurrection because apparently they are equivalent to brave and noble political warriors of old for stealing their mom's foundation. Being transgendered is not a political or fashion statement, and it's indicative of the hipster douche mindset, which is defined by flaunting ignorance, that they don't know the difference between someone who is transgendered and a transvestite. Transvestite is a word that makes cross-dressing sound like a medical condition for some reason. And this trans-trender behavior lends edgy douche fucks the opportunity to say that all transgendered people are just pretending, or going through what equates to a dramatic teenage emo phase. Edgy douche fucks and hipster douches have a symbiotic relationship. One couldn't survive without the other because they both use each other to push whatever bullshit they come up with because, hey, everybody needs to point to a stupid enemy to justify their stupidity. All the while, they act like, because they're different in some fashion, they are better than you are. They're like one giant closed-circuit human centipede. Nothing from the outside gets in, and nothing from the inside gets out. And everything on the inside is shit. Not to bring the political spectrum into this, but since some people are jittery about that kind of thing and need things explained to them in those terms, hipster douches are generally found on the left, and edgy douche fucks are generally found on the right. Of course, there's a decent amount of bleed there, but both of these one-dimensional dimwits are cut from the same douche cloth. Both of them have the tendency to take shiny new labels and ideas, or defunct labels and ideas, parade them around, and beat others over the head with them, regardless of whether that idea can handle questioning. But that doesn't really matter to them in the long run. Consistency is an afterthought. Hell, actually thinking about something they're doing is an afterthought. They just enjoy the fact that this shiny, out-of-the-ordinary idea makes some people angry, and they just adore how it makes other people laugh at them because of how plainly stupid it is. Because as long as that happens, they can pretend that their ideas have legitimacy. Not on their merits, of course, but on the criteria that they are persecuted for being so profoundly retarded in public. And they're treated that way mainly because they don't even know what the fuck they're talking about. Which is why, whenever you engage with these douches, they demand a peer-reviewed thesis on why their ideas are bad, but refuse to provide you with anything except for someone else's stream of consciousness that they copy and paste from somewhere else. Warning. This is not saying that all positions that are in the minority are incorrect and should be laughed at. This is just someone saying that sometimes ideas are in the minority because they're terrible. The reason the termites have been allowed to dine this long is because it seems that people in positions of power in various communities, game creators, authors, comic writers, politics junkies, people with high standing within atheist and skeptical communities, were too worried about being called a bad word by professional tantrum throwers that they caved to their demands whenever they tried to bully them over something completely harmless. I think back when Gamergate was a big thing. I'm pretty sure it was shown that the people who complain about how sexist games are barely ever play any fucking games. Just to show you how the sausage is made, let's talk about how this whole third-wave feminist bullying hipster idiocy works in practice. Do you see this character? This is Tracer from the game Overwatch, and this was one of the poses you could select as a victory pose. Much hay was made over this character in social justice circles because of just how generous the character is with her ass. Now, anybody who is familiar with the game will know that Tracer is a very giggly and upbeat character, and so poses like this wouldn't be out of the norm. However, with the power of intersectionality, we can turn this into a feminist cause yet. Do you think that this pose is a brave statement about how empowered women can participate in defiant acts against the patriarchy, which consist of presenting their ass to the camera? Or do you think that this pose is a sexist and misogynist piece of trash that portrays women as nothing but sex objects for male use? It's tough, isn't it? Which one it is all depends on whether the online social justice hugbox likes the creator of this character, and whether they've mainlined some outrage recently. That's the problem with these worldviews that are based on nothing but making bullshit up off the top of your head. The actual content is not what is at issue here, but everything surrounding the content. And that's one of the issues with these intersectional annoying bullies. Intersectional meaning that they have some strange license to make anything and everything about themselves, their useless degree, and their pet obsessions. They judge art on everything except for the actual fucking art. Whether they approve of a piece of artwork is generally judged on the criteria of which sex created the art and whether they were trying to push an approved feminist message with said art. But if that particular hipster douche's hatred or admiration runs deep enough for a specific artist, author, public figure, etc., anything they say or create can be spun into being a bad message or a good message that relates to feminism. even if the person has never heard of feminism in their entire fucking lives. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if an artist says he was trying to represent the duality of man within a painting, and one of these fucks screams from the back of the art gallery, "What about the duality of women, you sexist?" And then the whole class claps. Art always has multiple interpretations, and none of them are more logically valid than the other. But when you intentionally interpret a piece of art so that it tarnishes the real-life reputation of someone you already hated, I have to be suspicious about the purity of your art interpretation faculties. Eventually, that hatred gets spread across a bunch of people with the cognitive abilities of a wet sock, and that artist now must be forced to change their work or be barred from showing it to others. If someone like you opposes that censorship via played-up offense, you might just be a sexist too. The one thing I can't quite put my finger on is why sexism, racism, misogyny, and other similar variants of bigotry are constantly the go-to smears. Where is this wisdom received? Was this the excuse they gave all the time whenever they made mistakes in order to get out of punishment? When they were younger, did they demand an A on their spelling tests despite spelling every word incorrectly because they were challenging harmful, bigoted social norms about putting letters in the correct order? Was this presented to them by their professors? Were they simply convinced that bigotry is everywhere and in everything, and in order to be a good person, they have to find that bigotry everywhere and in everything? I don't know. Maybe a combination of them. But we know where the baseline is, at least. Their strategy consists of repeating the same false smear over and over and over again until something goes their way. The only reason these bullies got any traction at all is because no one with any power to effect change anywhere was willing to put even a speed bump in their way whenever they whined about something. They marched down their path of moral posturing, and everyone just decided to give a damn and listen to them. It's like someone doing hurdles at the Olympics. And while everyone else is trying to get to the finish line the quickest on their own, these nutcases drop to the ground and roll around in their own tears until other racers, who actually trained for this moment, carry them over the hurdle, rinse and repeat until the finish line. These people are beaten by either ignoring them or outright opposing them and letting the mean words they call you bounce off of you. That's all they've got. It's all about intimidation. Every single time someone who did nothing remotely sexist or racist is called sexist or racist, there's a sinister, unheard voice expressing what is truly meant by these accusations. I will destroy your reputation by spreading rumors about you. I refuse to be held accountable for spreading these rumors, and there's nothing you can do about it. You wouldn't want everyone thinking you're a bigot, would you? Then I'd suggest you kneel. Call that an extreme translation if you want. I don't care. Fewer and fewer people are putting up with their nonsensical screaming, and those who act this way are recognizing that fewer and fewer people give a shit about what they claim to champion. Because let's be honest, does anyone really care about how a particular novel doesn't cater to their specific obsessions with demographics, sexual preferences, and contains no characters that match their every thought, word, and deed? It's been well documented how the people with this mindset act when minor things don't go their way, like a specific game developer doesn't capitulate and change the breast size of a main character because it's too unrealistic, or that their college decided not to censor a speaker on the wrong side of the political spectrum. Imagine how they act when things that actually matter don't go their way. Like the election of the President of the United States.
You don't deserve to be in America! Shame! You removed me! This is my America! This is my America! My America! Let me out if you can! This is my America! You have sold us out! Listen to your heart! Listen to the facts! Listen to all of it! Can I take my things with me? Oh, take me out! I don't care! This is serious. You sold America.
I'm surprised they aren't consistently huddled in the corner with a pair of Depends filling up every 30 seconds while they browse the internet. It's a strange psychological state to see these people in. To imagine that they are simultaneously frightened and offended by anything and everything, and yet still muster up the courage to smear anyone who appears to be outside of the bubble they've crafted around themselves. At least that's if we take what they express to be their feelings at face value. When in reality, I don't think they're honestly as angry and offended as they profess to be. They just yearn for that state of being because being angry and offended automatically means you're fighting the good fight. Somehow. Overreaction is not a word in their vocabulary. The only fury they think exists is the righteous kind. But this is how they destroy communities. Various communities become so worried about appeasing those who do nothing but complain about everything, even if the complaint is the opposite of what they wanted a few minutes ago, that they cease to do anything they actually set out to do. The forces of entitled babyish whiners win the day when that happens. They have successfully made something all about them. The community becomes nothing but a glorified PR department for something that doesn't exist anymore. Labels and feigning interest in certain topics have become ornaments for boring personalities. I see this a decent amount with the label writer, at least recently. People call themselves writers in the hope that they might later write something, and it sounds cool to tell others that you're a writer, not because they've actually written anything. Eventually, you discover that this person has no intention of writing anything. They just think that people who are writers are cool, smart, and interesting, and they want to be cool, smart, and interesting too. Now take the term writer and replace it with skeptic. It's the same thing. Bragging isn't free. If you want to get credit for doing things, you have to actually do those things, as opposed to just watching other people do those things and then repeating what they said on your half-assed blog. And whenever the people who actually do things disagree with the half-assed bloggers, they, again, revert to what they know. People only disagree with me because they're bigots, and by the way, I'm a victim. When the only thing they are truly the victim of is not being fawned over for simply existing. It's the title that's more important than the work, after all, and if you can get away with calling yourself a PhD without having earned it, what's the big deal, am I right? These intersectional feminist hipster douches' principles are entirely negotiable when it applies to them, but completely non-negotiable when it applies to anyone they happen to dislike. I'm sure all of us remember Twitter's incredibly noble stance against harassment by implementing a Trust and Safety Council, after they decided that women action in the media just wasn't doing enough, and how numerous people on that website use a block bot dotted with a couple people who actually do nothing but send threats, just so they can justify the placing of hundreds of other people on the list due to polite dissent or mockery. The definition of harassment is consistently expanded. Someone disagrees with you more than once and tells you that they do? Harassment. Someone makes fun of you through the internet? Harassment. Someone makes a video criticizing your points? Harassment. Someone saying hello to you when you would prefer they not do so? Harassment. Feminists like Jessica Valenti were totally on board with this narrative and were completely fine making numerous attempts to push that square into the triangular hole. Let's read a section of this sad excuse for an article titled, "Insults and Rape Threats. Writers shouldn't have to deal with this. I'm tired of laughing it off and rolling my eyes. Because while misspelled threats or entreaties for me to get back in the kitchen are certainly easy to mock, the disdain with which they're employed is not very funny. For all the progress women have made, there's always an online comment section or forum somewhere to remind us that, when given anonymity and a keyboard, some men will use the opportunity to harass and threaten. I don't read the comments anymore, and even if I did, the moderators block the worst of them. But it's not a coincidence that the articles of mine that attract the most abuse on social media are those about rape, harassment, political representation, or everyday examples of sexism. Anything that suggests there's still work to do for true gender equality sends some men into a rage, a response that mostly serves to prove my point." Not only does she employ the immensely stupid Lewis's Law, which reads, "Comments on any article about feminism justify feminism," she also acts like the only criticism she receives is sexist men being flown into a rage over a cool, hip, smart feminist woman who won't take none of their shit. However, when it was discovered that someone was belligerent to Ivanka Trump on an airplane, that definition of harassment could be thrown out the fucking window, and suddenly it's sexist and infantilizing to shield women from IRL criticism. By the way, from what I can gather, the guy didn't get up and start yelling and spitting on people. A witness to the event who was sitting in front of Ivanka Trump said that the guy was acting very agitated and just said out loud, "Oh my God, this is a nightmare. They've ruined our country and now they're ruining our flight." He also said that Ivanka Trump told security that she didn't want to make this a thing, but JetBlue decided to boot the passenger anyway. The feminist definition of harassment is so expansive so as to include multiple incidents of drive-by disagreement on the internet, and then for some fucked up reason it can be retracted again to not include someone being a dick to someone you don't like in real life on an airplane. I hate to trot out the tired and cliche role reversal argument here, but can you imagine what Valenti's reaction would be if this happened to her on an airplane? It would be all over The Guardian. You couldn't stop her from mentioning the sexism. This would make headlines in 80 different countries, and we'd all be having a discussion about man-planing. It doesn't even matter what the reason was for someone being a dick to Valenti on an airplane either. It would be misogyny. Valenti could have been punching everyone in the face while shoving others' personal items into her asshole, and the slightest pushback from anyone on that airplane would have been considered an act of blatant woman hatred. Valenti, and lots of feminists on top of that, have one dictionary for the people they like and another one for the people they dislike. What's more is that Jessica Valenti sent this series of tweets explaining how calling the thing the dude did in the plane harassment is a dangerous way to act like any criticism of Ivanka Trump is sexist. This coming from the lover of Lewis's Law and from the person who characterizes every criticism of her that comes from people on the internet harassment that she shouldn't have to deal with. Poor Valenti. She doesn't know that you can't just project the entire fucking modus operandi of your pitiful career onto others and have it be true. It takes one to know one, sister. She thinks that she, as a woman, is entitled to be protected from internet disagreement by trigger-happy moderators, but Ivanka Trump apparently lost the entitlement that Jessica Valenti claims for herself, because petty bullshit. Maybe Ivanka just isn't the type of woman worth protecting from what they claim to be victimized by, either because Valenti and her cohorts don't think it's that serious to begin with due to their obvious playing up of victimhood, or they are such shallow, vindictive, mean girls that they would try to justify it. The threat narrative extends to all women, until a woman is found that the high school-esque clique of internet feminist hipster fucks don't like, then the threat narrative conveniently doesn't apply to them. In fact, Valenti claims to be consistent with the whole women are constantly victims of disagreement narrative when it comes to someone they don't like, is sexist. Well, fuck me if that isn't solid evidence of just how someone's brain could backflip into oblivion and suck us all into a stupidity singularity where any trace of intelligence is spaghettified. It seems like Valenti's just pissed that other people are stealing her victimhood. She is the real damsel in distress here. Pay attention to feminists who exaggerate their victimhood, but don't listen to those other guys' exaggerations. Those are just exaggerations after all. God damn it, somebody stop me! And this is all just another example of someone who got where they are today because they called themselves a thing, as opposed to earning their standing through merit. This is also another example of hipster douches calling bigotry whenever it happens to suit them. It is sexist to think Valenti should suck it up and deal with rude criticism, but also sexist to think that Ivanka Trump shouldn't have to suck it up and deal with rude criticism. And so the wheel turns. When push comes to shove, their worldviews always double back to a pathetic, vindictive political grudge war. Ivanka Trump just happened to come out of the wrong vagina at the wrong time, so fuck her. The genetic dice just weren't kind to her, so she doesn't get a slice of the sweet and juicy oppression pie. Articles like this and attitudes like this are what happens when a leech forgets that it needs a host to survive. This is what happens when you run out of coattails to latch onto. This is what happens when you give yourself over to an ideology that has an answer for everything, and that answer is always convenient for you. Not only is it convenient, but it delivers a nice, pre-packaged moral justification to be as bigoted as you want while ensuring everyone else that they are the actual bigots.
Hey fellow white guys.
It's about to be a new year.
And there's a few things we think you could do a little bit better in 2017.
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes, got nowhere to run. The night goes on as I'm fading away.
I'm not going to sit here and listen to your intellectual treatise about how white guys act and what white guys feel when you know nothing about me. Nothing you could possibly say will convince me on an intellectual level that I'm some sort of ignorant pseudo-racist, because I'm not one. This is just name-calling, dressed up as some smarmy hipster logical conclusion. Imagine you're just walking down the street, minding your own business, just walking down the sidewalk. Then someone runs up to you and says, "You're a piece of shit who hates black people." You then reel back and say, "What? No, I'm not. I don't hate black people." The person then laughs, rolls their eyes, and says, "Okay, whitey, now let me present my argument to you, because quite clearly you aren't very well versed in this topic." No, dickhead! You don't get to present your case as to why I hate other races, because I am the only one who can read my mind about my feelings on a topic. Nothing this person could possibly say will be a cogent argument about why I'm racist for, ironically, being some sort of racial stereotype they've dreamed up for merely existing as a white guy. The only thing you should be telling these people is fuck off and moving on with your life, because they're bullies. They aren't looking for an argument. They're looking for a monologue and an enemy to tar. The MO of these people isn't stamping out bigotry. It isn't even trying to make the world a slightly less bigoted place. Hell, for all I know, they could just be taking advantage of justifiably pissed off people to generate revenue. But in my honest opinion, it's a horrid, flailing attempt to make obvious bigotry sound academic, high-minded, and well thought through, when it actually is what bigotry has always been, either petty or menacing. Hold on a second. Let me just wax poetic about how white men should be acting, because obviously they're fucking out of control, am I right? I barely even know what to say at this point apart from fuck you, because if this were happening to me face to face, that's all I could think to say. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by wrist-flapping racial studies and communications double majors why I'm not acting properly when they know nothing of me, my opinions, or my life. I'm not going to listen to a bully try and intellectually justify why I should accept their being a bully to me, and that it's only okay when they're the ones doing it, and the target they've identified is fair game. I have a story to tell you from my personal life, just to show how I've dealt with bullies like this for my entire life. And I think it could provide some insight into how to deal with alleged adults who decide that now it's their turn. Maybe it can help some newbies deal with hipster douche, feminist, activist, identity politics obsessed loon bags in real life if they ever end up crossing them. And who knows? You might. You might just be wearing dreadlocks in the wrong section of your school. The story starts in my high school. You know, high school, where everybody self-selects into various cliques and the social order functions in and around those cliques. Luckily for me, I went to a relatively small high school, and so these boundaries were much less set in unspoken stone. Of course, there were still random people who had an ego the size of your average city, and they would take every opportunity to strengthen it. Now, being the person I am, I consistently had the temptation to poke at the ego whenever I had the opportunity. I mean, what's the point of having the ability to be a dickhead if you refuse to use it on the people who quite rightly deserve it? And obviously, I had a target painted on my back because I was upwards of 5 feet tall for half of my high school career with the last name Little, so one can imagine what I had to contend with. There was this kid, and we'll call him Asshole, because I want to protect the people involved, and it gives me an excuse to call him an asshole repeatedly. My school had this policy surrounding their textbooks, which made it mandatory that kids buy these stretchy book covers so that in the likely event a kid spills something, it wouldn't damage the outside of the book. Long story short, Asshole and his group of friends stole my book cover when I left a book behind accidentally. And when I asked for it back, they wouldn't give it to me. Now, Asshole had one distinct weakness that most bullies have, and that's blatant insecurity about a particular thing. And Asshole's particular thing was that he was missing 2 of his front teeth. So while they were laughing about stealing the short kid's book cover, I made a snide remark while Asshole was in the midst of whispering fag to his friends about how at least when I'm on my knees, I have to open my mouth first. This was a big no-no, and Asshole flew into a hysteric frenzy threatening to beat me up and blah blah blah. I ended up just walking away. This all spiraled out of control for a couple days. Eventually he confronted me in the hallway and threatened to kick my ass, so I told him that if he tried to beat me up, I'd kick the shit out of him. Then I walked into my history class, and strangely, was not bothered by him again. And then the whole class clapped. I'm kidding, but in all seriousness, I understand this sounds like something straight out of Tumblr, but I'm using it to make a point about bullies, so disbelieve it all you like. You see how things went in that circumstance, right? It was all intimidation. And the moment you refuse to be swayed by intimidation, the moment said bully realizes that you will present a problem to them, their reputation, and their ever-precious ego, they end up leaving you alone. Capitulation will only make them more willing to up the ante. I had a similar thing happen to me in high school a year later, and it went much the same way. A whole bunch of grandstanding, peacocking, and chest puffing with absolutely zero follow-through. For all of the performance and reputation, nothing much actually happened. It just seemed to be an act in defending one's image as resident tough guy, while actually displaying none of the toughness required. And if one doesn't see a responsibility to mock those people without apology when they try to bear down on you or others, then I think one has made a grave error of judgment. I'm not some exemplary tough guy either, I mean, fucking look at me. But I'm intelligent enough to tell when someone is just putting on a show. So the best thing that you can do, ladies and gentlemen, to fight this wave of nonsense, is to simply plant your feet, don't take anything too seriously, and laugh at identity politics-soaked bullies. Because if there's one thing a bully hates, it's having a good, deep-cutting joke told at their expense, and everyone around them busting a gut. Here's to 2017. Ta-ta for now.